Welcome to the podcast series on technology and innovation in coaching, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading independent body. I am Claudia, coach and entrepreneur and founder of eHuddle. In this AC podcast series, we are privileged to talk to coaches, academics, and entrepreneurs who will be sharing with us some of their research, findings, and experiences related to technologies that could help us democratize coaching, elevate the coaching practice, lower cost, or save time, among other benefits. This is a very broad topic, going from how technologies can support a coach or carry out a coaching process. We hope this series brings technology closer to coaches. Enjoy listening. Welcome to Jonathan Passmore, author and editor of more than 30 books, Senior Vice President at CoachHub, and Professor of Coaching and Behavioral Change at Henley Business School. Jonathan, I will let you tell more our listeners about you and about what you love about coaching.
Hi, Claudia. It's great to join you today. And my background in coaching goes back, I guess, more than 20 years. And what drew me to coaching, I guess, in the first place, is that pleasure of engaging in a really personal, intimate, and a useful conversation to help people to really think through and plan and to make progress on things that are important to them. And my background really is I'm a psychologist, so that was what was drawing me into coaching and facilitating. I have done a lot of work over the years in leadership development, and over that period of time, I did an MBA, I did a doctorate in psychology, and from that started my researching and my publications. The first book, Excellence in Coaching, I think came out in 2006 with a partnership with the Association for Coaching, and that spawned a series of other books, which included Diversity in Coaching, Leadership in Coaching, and a host of others. And then from there, I did a series with Wiley, which were a series of academic textbooks, 8 in total, 2 million words. And after that, there have been a host of different books from mindfulness to leadership to organizational change, and of course quite a few books in the coaching space, one of which we've collaborated on, which is We Coach, that also led to Coaching Tools Volume 1, and maybe, depending on when this goes out, Volume 2 or even Volume 3.
And that doesn't even include all the research. And I guess our first question is regarding a paper that you published last year with Rosie Evans-Krim, where you compare coaching to the clothing industry. And you talk about the tipping point and how the introduction of remote working COVID investor interest research might mean that the industry will move from a professional service delivered by a limited number of high-cost specialists to low-cost coaching for the many with higher standards in consistency of the product or service. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, so having been involved in the coaching industry for quite a long while and looking back to those early days, late 1990s, early 2000s, we were, as coaches, groping around in terms of what we were doing. There was very little research. Most of our experiences about whether coaching was useful or not were anecdotal. There were a couple of coaching books, John Whitmore's most famously Coaching for Performance, but essentially we were figuring out how to do this thing that was labeled coaching. And now as I look back from the sort of 2020s to those days, it seems pretty obvious to me that while there was talk about coaching being something new then, maybe even a fad, actually my view is that coaching isn't anything new, isn't anything special. It's just a conversation between people. And probably we as humans with advanced communication skills have been having conversations that we now label coaching for tens of thousands of years. And that if you or I or some of your listeners to this podcast were out on the savannah this morning or this afternoon looking for berries or trying to hunt down dinner, we would be collaborating together as a small tribal group or a hunting party or a berry collecting group, and we'd be communicating with each other. And given that life expectancy 10,000 years ago was probably 35 or 40, as a leader of the group, the leader would want to help us to learn. So they could tell us what we needed to do, But actually, we know now from psychology and science that helping people to discover for themselves is much more powerful. They almost certainly knew that back 10,000 years ago. So they too would have been asking reflective questions that would have helped the younger members of the hunting party to think for themselves, where is the best place in this little narrow valley to stand to capture the game that might be coming through? How do we drive the game from one end of the valley to the other where we can then ambush them and potentially kill them for dinner? Looking across the valley, looking at where the light is, where the sunshine is, given the time of year, where's the best place that we might go at this time in the day for the ripest, sweetest berries? So there was probably that type of developmental learning conversations happening 10,000 years ago. And when we then think about the next stage in development, and probably often are seen as the roots of coaching, but as I've argued, it goes before that, the roots of coaching are often traced back to the Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, and of course Socrates, and I'm meaning Greek philosopher, not Brazilian football player. And Socrates focused on that reflective question. He was encouraging people to think in a critical way. And so that open-ended question, we have picked up that tradition. And the third stage of development of coaching is really professionalization. And that happened in the 1980s and more in the 1990s, the emergence of the International Coaching Federation, the AMCC. And like many other professions, you get a guild of people, a group of society coming together to say, how do we set some standards for our industry? How do we raise quality in our industry? And coaching did that in the 1980s and the 1990s. Other clothing industry, for example, did that in the medieval period. So the stages of development are similar, but when these stages happen, do vary across time. And what we also then saw is the setting of training standards, membership of professional bodies, such as these guilds or associations. And then you have ethical standards, way that individuals set together, almost to control the way that that industry operates. And that has some advantages for individuals who are looking to buy the clothing, that they know it's produced to a certain standard. But like the clothing industry didn't stand still in the Middle Ages, that individuals were operating in small production processes, maybe in a cottage industry, you would describe it as. And coaching in the 1970s and the 1980s, even in the 1990s, was very similar to that. It's a cottage industry. Most individuals were operating as sole practitioners. There were small consultancy companies that might have brought together 10 or 20 or 30 coaches, but it was very small scale. But the pivot point, the fourth pivot point in the development of coaching history, I would argue, is to do with the potential for digitization. And what we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years is a coming together of the science of coaching. So some fabulous research, randomized controlled trials, meta-analysis, systematic literature reviews that enable us to understand what works. How do we construct a coaching conversation that facilitates behavioral change? How do we construct one that enables individuals to develop insight? And the second aspect that is coming together with the science is the science of technology. And we've seen over the last 20 years, increasingly a movement towards internet. So when I started work in the 1980s, no one had a computer on their desk. Now everybody has a very portable computer on their desk. Those computers are linked in across the world through the internet. And we've seen in the last 5 years, or increasingly in the last 3 years, organizations using multiple workplace apps as a way of facilitating improvements in efficiency and effectiveness. So that coming together of the science of behavioral change with the science of technology made the coaching industry at a pivot point that was then tipped by COVID. As we all went to our bedrooms or our studies at home, people recognized to realize, I don't need to meet my coach in a face-to-face conversation. I can do that just as efficiently online. And if my coach saves all of that travel time and that travel cost in coming to see me, we can reduce the cost of coaching. At the same time, organizations were then saying, well, actually, I'm not only saving on my office space, I get people working at home, but I can scale this offer up from it being just for chief executives or directors. Now the price has come down and it's available on a platform. When I could afford it for 10 or 100 staff, now I can afford it for 100 or 1,000 staff. So we can start to cross the organization. And because geography is no longer an issue, we haven't got people traveling in to a particular sets of offices, it doesn't matter whether you're in London, Lisbon, or Liechtenstein, any of those possibilities, we can connect up, and we connect people from the United States to Europe, from Europe to Africa, from Africa to Asia. So we have a connected globe, and the coach is able to deliver that coaching service through that technology, leveraging the science of behavioral change. So we get scaling of size of contracts. And then organizations are also asking questions about, how do we evaluate coaching? If you're only looking for the feedback from the manager or the leader who's having coaching, we know from our experiences as coaches, you ask a client, how was that? They say, that was great, loved it. Oh, Jonathan, you're such a fabulous coach. But that isn't very helpful feedback. Of course, what we want to do is have some metrics to enable us to evaluate how coaching was, and even better, if we're able to then add those metrics together across the 100 or the 1,000 people in our organization across the globe to be able to track performance and even track impact of coaching. So we can develop more sophisticated measures, 360s, that you can use without pieces of paper. You can use an online questionnaire to gather that data at a starting point and at the end of the coaching intervention, and measure the impact that coaching intervention has had. And really, businesses like CoachHub are all about recognizing that tipping point that's happening, the coming together of behavioral science with technology, spotting that the moment of COVID has really redefined many workplaces and the nature of learning and development, and then leveraging that science, technology, behavioral change to enable organizations to be able to scale and measure coaching more effectively, making it available for the many, not just the few.
Thank you for taking us through that journey. I almost saw myself picking cherries all the way until technology. And I almost wanted to go into more about feedback and impact and have a podcast about that. But since we're focusing in technology, how is coaching different in this digital space, in your opinion?
I guess I touched on some of those aspects. So it's easier to access. It's more convenient for the coach. No need to get your car to the railway station, get on a train, travel into a city, get on a tube or a bus to get to the offices of your client, and then reverse that journey to come home. And you might be able to do 1 or 2 coaching sessions in a day. And instead, you can do 4 or 6 or 8 coaching sessions in a day. So we've seen coaching sessions, instead of the requirement, if I was meeting somebody in London 15 or 20 years ago, and I was making that journey, I would ask them to have a 2-hour coaching session. That was a pretty standard conversation. And instead, if I'm now able to just connect in as easy at the click of a finger, then I'm going to have a shorter conversation. So conversations are shorter online. They're more convenient for coaches. They're more convenient for managers. They're likely to be more frequent. As I mentioned earlier, they're scalable, so you can do many people in the organization at different geographical locations. It doesn't matter where the coach or the coachee are. It's also more measurable. And what you also find with many of the digital providers is a link to other associated learning. So it's coaching plus, digital coaching and beyond digital coaching. And this idea that people can benefit from the learning journey, having a conversation. And then, of course, as I often did when I met people face to face, I'd say, oh, yeah, you're interested in, and they might have been talking about organizational change or about a topic. I might go home, and on my way home, I'd pick up a book that I'd recommended in the coaching session. I'd pop it in the post to them. And so the following week, a physical book would arrive. They might have a read of that before I go back and see them next month. Now, in that coaching session, I can just send them a link to a reading, maybe an HBR article, or maybe another piece of crafted content. So many of the platform providers like CoachHub are building out not only a coaching intervention, but supported by a lot of learning content that sees these elements coming together hand in hand. So digital provides both the conversation and the convenience of the conversation, the scalability, the measurement of impact, and then the opportunity to extend learning without having to pop to WH Smith's or a book provider to buy the book and post it. Actually, there it is, and the chapter or the article that you want provided on the person's laptop or on their phone at their convenience. So I see those are some of the advantages. Now, there are, of course, other things that digital platforms can't provide. There have been times in my coaching history of the hundreds, maybe the thousands of people I've worked with over the best part of, 20 odd years, where you need to touch somebody. We touch them maybe in the old days when you used to shake hands. I might touch somebody on the arm as I'm leaving, just as a sort of a friendship, bye-bye. And that type of interaction clearly is lost. We can't have touch. We don't have touch in the moment because of COVID, but we'd also be losing that touch in a digital environment. Now, how much of a loss is that? Well, there is some psychological evidence that suggests we are very sensitive as humans to touch, and we value that. And here I mean appropriate touch, the handshake, or a touch of the upper arm. For some relationships, for some people, that can be appropriate. Of course, in some situations, culture, gender, power play a role that touch would be inappropriate in that way. So it's always about thinking about, what's the relationship that's going on here? So that's the first thing that I think is a small loss. I think the other thing that can be a loss but can also be a benefit is what might be considered to be the role of intimacy in a coaching conversation. And some people have argued, and from the research that I've done, is that it feels a little bit less intimate. It feels more intimate when I'm speaking to somebody face to face. And that anecdotal experience, that report back on qualitative research, is matched by, interestingly, other qualitative studies that suggest individuals are more likely to be more open, more trusting, and to disclose more in a digital conversation than they are face to face. So I think we still need to do a little bit of work. Probably it's both. For some people, there might be a hesitancy to reveal information on a digital conversation, which might hold them back. It doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel real. I'm not familiar with this technology. This is new, so I'm going to restrict the way that I engage. For other people who might be more familiar with the technology or more comfortable in these environments, they reveal more. And so the more you reveal, the greater the depth that the conversation can go to. So I think we need a little bit of research to understand how and why that might vary. And there are probably ups and downs in relation to that. I guess the other thing that might be argued about the impact of a digital environment is the move away from this coaching is something special, in a little way that possibly we might have seen 40 years ago or 50 years ago, that if you were a board director of a company, maybe you got a company car and you got a company car parking space. You felt privileged. And exactly the same with executive coaching. It was special. It was elite. When you got your coach, you were somebody. Just like when you had your company car, you were marked out as being different. Now, when we're democratizing coaching in the same way that actually we're trying to treat people more equally in the workplace for the benefits and privileges, maybe many people have access to having a leased car or a car benefit, or choosing another benefit that's more appropriate to them. Maybe they choose, instead of having a car, maybe they choose personal trainers or gym membership. For coaching, we're saying it's not just the elite, not just the board that have access to this. Yes, their performance is important. Yes, they still have access. But actually, every employee in an organization is important and needs to be nurtured and valued and respected and developed. And so extending that removes a sense of privilege, but democratizes coaching across the organization, allowing all career grades to benefit from the coaching conversation, improving their careers, helping them to make progress, not only in their career, but in their individual job.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that view. Definitely some of the benefits and some of the changes, because some are just basic changes to how a coaching session goes, especially that one of having shorter sessions is very interesting. And of course, the democratization of coaching, which is something that we all want. Another question would be, with your training hat on, what types of changes do you see as imminent for coaches that are in training or that have graduated or that have more years of experience?
So, Claudia, I think that's a fantastic question. And I think that the coach training industry is behind the curve. So I think the coach training industry is still in 2017 and 2018. And it's thinking about face-to-face relationships. That was true in 2017 and 2018. Probably the majority, more than half of conversations were physically face-to-face. That world has gone. Now we're operating in a world which is, in the majority, is a digital space. More than 80% of conversations have been happening online, more than 90%. When we look at the Future Trends Survey published just last year from research I did with the EMCC, the evidence says that more than 80% of coaches are expecting to continue on digital devices. So it might be on their computer using Zoom or other platforms, or they're using organizations and coaching through CoachHub and such providers. But either way, digital has now become the dominant domain for coaching provision. And I don't see that changing to go back to a face-to-face as a majority of coaching conversations. I think there is value and there's a place for face-to-face, but that's now the minority and possibly a small minority, maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 of conversations. So if that's the case, we've moved to a digital environment. How are coach training providers repositioning their courses to think about what it means to coach online? What are the new skills that people need? And what I've noticed in multiple conversations with people is that I still come across people 2 years into the pandemic. Here we are, where it's almost 2 years now of the pandemic. And I still have people who have got a light source behind them, who are silhouetted, and I can't really see any of their facial features. I've got people who have got cameras where they're highly pixelated and they look as though they're a computer generated game rather than a human who's sitting in front of me. People who have got really poor sound quality and that there's disturbance in the background, or there's other things that are going on, dogs barking and children playing, which of course is lovely, but is a disturbance if you're trying to have an in-depth, reflective, deep conversation. So I think we need to have the skills about how to optimize our use of technology, setting up the call and how we then use that. Secondly, about how individuals then integrate other pieces of supplementary technology. How would the coach use a whiteboard? In the past, I'd have a flip chart. In the room, I'd use that. How many coaches are using Mural or a Miro to do whiteboards alongside their coaching? My evidence is 5%. Gosh, that's a tiny number. Yeah, I suspect maybe 1 in 3 or 50%, probably at some stage, were using a flip chart in a coaching conversation when they met face to face, or a piece of paper. So how do we then help people to develop the skills to integrate those other applications, those other apps with the coaching practices that they're doing? And then the last aspect, I think we need to be really seriously thinking through aspects such as ethics. What are the implications of coaching in a digital environment for the ethical practices? It's different. And I think we need to think about those as professional bodies and coach training providers. What about GDPR? What are the implications for the GDPR in terms of, have you got a GDPR policy if you're using a digital device? How does that relate to the digital device? Where are you storing the data? Have you entered into a contract with Zoom? Well, do you know where Zoom is hosting this event through? Where's the server? And questions such as this and the whole digitization of your record keeping needs equally to be thought through. So there's a host of different changes that individuals need to be making, and they need to be reflected in coach training courses. And we might also see alongside of those, as the professional bodies start to research and understand coach behaviors, that we may see changes in coach competencies alongside changes in coaching ethics and clearer professional standards around GDPR, etc.
A lot to look forward to. And I guess this brings me to other types of technologies that are still to evolve and complicate this even more. What are your thoughts on virtual reality?
So I think virtual reality is at a stage where we are experimental. So there's no research about coaching and virtual reality. Let me just say, watch this space. So depending on when your program goes out, then I'm currently engaged in a VR coaching study. So we hope to bring some interesting data out over the coming months connected to this. But I think we're just experimenting with VR and the metaverse of what this might mean as a potential tool to facilitate insight and engagement. So I can see its greatest value might be in team coaching, particularly in a global team where individuals might be based in different geographical territories, and how as part of a coaching conversation for that team, you might use a virtual reality environment to facilitate insight and new learning for that team and its interrelationships.
Just to give the coaches out there some context, when do you think coaches will have to worry about or start really focusing on virtual reality?
The 4th of November, 2027. Of course, predicting the future, there's only one thing that one can say about predicting the future is you can guarantee that you're going to be wrong, because the future is by its very nature unpredictable, and it unfolds in unpredictable ways. So there was the iPhone. When the iPhone came out, there had been predecessors to the iPhone that hadn't taken off. But the timing that the iPhone came out meant that it just caught the wave. And now all of us, most people, will have a smartphone. And that's seen as being an essential communications device in the way that we interact with our digital world. There have been other pieces of technology that have come along that you see and you think, wow, this is just going to revolutionize the world. And either the timing or the product or the marketing just doesn't take off. So I'm interested in AI and VR and other technologies. I think as coaches, we should be open to the possibilities of how they might enhance our work with clients. But we should also be realistic to recognize some of those things will be consoled to the dustbin of history, while others over the course of the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years might revolutionize coaching. And only by keeping our radar going, gathering information, experimenting, playing with things, testing them out, can we see how they might help us in the work that we're trying to do in service of our clients.
Well, conscious of time, Jonathan, I guess the final questions are more, where could our listeners find out more about this topic or get in touch with you?
So I'd be delighted if people would like to connect to me on LinkedIn. Be happy to hear from people. And in relation to the paper that I was talking about with Rosie Evan, the Frontiers of Psychology paper, that's an open access journal. So if people type in Rosie Evans, Jonathan Passmore, Frontiers of Psychology, the Future of Coaching, they'll be able to download that paper and read it for themselves.
And now this one is regarding one of your favorite things in this world. What book did you read last year that you enjoyed, both professional and not professional, that you would recommend to your listeners?
So a professional book, it would be Me and White Supremacy. So I think that many of us are on a journey in terms of our understanding about race and diversity. And I'm certainly on that personal journey myself. And I would encourage people to engage and reflect as part of their personal journey of insight and the work that each of us needs to do in connection with D&I. And in terms of a personal book, I'm just currently reading The Day of the Triffids. And it's been probably 40 years since I last read that book. And it has some very interesting things to say about the nature of society and who we are as humans.
And I guess the final, if you still have time for this one, is tell us about 5 things that are around you and how they're relevant.
I've got above my computer a host of books. So I love books. I like writing them, but I love reading other people's books, coaching books, and books about change and psychology. I currently have a cup of tea sitting on my desk. I love tea, and next to it is a dessert because I've joined you during my lunch break. And what else? There's a third thing that's sitting on my desk at the moment. Well, I've got an iPhone that's sitting here that I've switched on to silent, and I guess that's a reflection about how we can be, I started to ring, how we can be using technology. I'm going to need to go, but thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely to speak to you, Claudia.
So thank you for listening to another episode by the Association for Coaching. I have been Claudia Day. Our purpose is to help coaches in the process of navigating the new technologies that are arising in this field. If you would like to find out more, please follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest episodes and conversations, as well as our digital learning calendar.